Hey everyone, this is another video on the Advanced Object-Oriented Programming chapter. So we're going to be looking at file 5, which is on private and protected scope. So if you remember, we talked about scope before when we talked about global and local scope. And scope just refers to where you can access a variable. So we talked about how local scope is when you're within a function that you can only access that variable inside of it, right? Or global is just when you make a variable outside of a function, you can access it wherever you want, at least in Python, right? So in classes, there's additional types of scope. So public scope, this is just any method or any variable that you make. You can access it outside of the class through an object. This is what we've been doing this entire time. Every single time we've made a variable, it's been public when we make it inside of a class with like any instance variable, it's been public. So then there's two other types of scope, and Python doesn't actually implement these very strictly compared to other languages. But you should be aware of the terms, especially if you start to code in any other language after this class. It's good to be familiar with them. So protected, this means that you want to write a variable that you can only access within the class or any of its subclasses. The way Python does this is it doesn't actually really have protected scope, but there's a convention to add an underscore to a variable. In fact, if we scroll down here, it would look like this. And that's just a way to show whoever is looking at your code that, hey, even though you can access this variable, technically, you shouldn't. And then private scope is where you put two underscores before a variable name. And the purpose of this is to confine access to the variable just to the class where you define the variable in. So this is probably going to make a little bit more sense if we just jump to an actual example. And I tried to come up with an example that might make sense why you would actually want to create a private scope variable here. Let me see if I actually have the right version of this open up. Let me close what we have here. Let's make sure we have this here. Oh, and you know what's funny? I actually already have the answer written out here. So let's let me actually just go into here. I'm going to say what's F2. So before this was just called balance. So I'm going to make it be called balance. So at this point, let's say we have Scrooge McDuck that has 100 mil in their account. And this is a class that keeps track of the total money in the bank, and account holders is just their name. And they can have a balance that they can add to or take away, and they can show their balance info, right? So if we look at Scrooge, for example, here, and we're just going to say, what is this, display balance? Okay, and this is just directly printing it, so we don't even have to, it's not returning anything, we just run that. So let's say Scrooge has 100,000, okay? Well, we could use the built-in, let's see, deposit or withdraw function, okay? Let's say we want to add, let's just add 15,000 to our bank. And I also want to make this point really quick too of some of the functionality of this class is that we are keeping track of the total money across all objects through this variable called total money, right? So when we add 100 million through Scrooge McDuck, we are actually updating our total money class variable as well. So let's say we have this here, we have total money, right? Then when we deposit 15,000, not only does it update Scrooge's balance, right? But it also updates the total money balance of the entire class. So one problem is that, so let's say we have Scrooge and we just want to access his balance directly. We could just change this to be 0. which is sad for Scrooge. He gets rid of all his money, right? We could display the balance and it should be updated correctly, but we just skipped, because we didn't do deposit or withdraw, we just skipped this line of code on line 71, where remember when we added 15,000? We called this and we're adding 15,000 to Scrooge's balance, but we're also adding 15,000 to the total money, right? So when we do this and we just manually change the balance outside of the function, or outside of the class, I should say, it works, but we've skipped some of the functionality that we hoped would stay true. So now our total money and the actual money held by all of our objects is not congruent anymore. There's a mismatch, right? So this is a problem caused by giving the user of our code access to a variable outside of our class. They're able to update this, even though we didn't really want them to, okay? So if we add 2 underscores to the beginning of the balance variable, let's go up to here to balance. I'm actually going to do a little trick where I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to push function F2, and that lets me change a variable. And when I push return, you're going to see it's going to update everywhere it's referenced in my code. So it's not just going to change here, it's also going to change here and here, which is pretty nice. Yeah, here, here, and here, right? So as soon as I do that, I'm going to, let's say I tried to access this variable. I'm going to actually end up creating a variable, which isn't what I want. But let's say we do even try to do this. It still isn't working actually because I'm not changing the actual value of this. Let's actually stare at this this variable that we created. In fact, let's actually go all the way back to here when we are creating the variable or the object. So now I pass in 100 million. I go down here and I'm setting my balance to be this. Let's look at how that appears when I hover over this. See how my balance looks really weird? It has an underscore, has the class name, and then it has underscore underscore balance. So this is called name mingling. It makes it so I can't just I can't go, hey, Scrooge, underscore underscore balance. Let me print that out. It makes it so that just doesn't even occur. Right? It's going to say, hey, I have no attribute of balance. And the whole idea is that we are making it harder to access this variable outside of our class, right? That's basically it. That's the entire idea behind it. You can still technically access it by doing account underscore underscore balance. And this is kind of where Python is weird because it still lets you technically access it. They just messed up the name of the variable if you try and access it outside of the scope of the class. So there we have to reference it by a weird name because we're basically trying to make it hard to access it so we don't do what we showed before where we're accessing it and changing it without going through our like approved pre-written methods that we have here. But when we reference the variable inside of our class, we can just still use underscore underscore balance directly because we're inside the class account, right? So that would be an example of making a variable private, right? The other thing that you could do, and I'm realizing I actually also have that solution already put right here, right? I have account holder. So one way that you can make something protected, which if you remember from the beginning of this video, I said the whole point of protected is to make it visible only within the class and any subclasses. You can just add a single underscore to it. But you'll notice if I want to, I could just do print Scrooge underscore account holder. And unlike when I made it private by adding the 2 underscores, this works totally fine. Nothing's stopping me from accessing it directly. This is just a little convention to signal to whoever's looking at my code to say, hey, I don't intend for you to access this variable outside of the class. That's basically what it's saying. So we're saying account holder, we're saying 1 underscore, show that this isn't intended to be accessed outside of the class. And 2 underscores like this is to make it harder to, 1, to show it's really not intended, to show it really isn't intended to be accessed outside class, and also actually make it harder to do so, right? Okay. So that is the idea behind this. So this would be a private variable. This would be example of protected. Though just remember, Python doesn't really give the real functionality of protected variables or even private variables because you can still access them. It just allows you ways to signify what you want the intended use to be. So that should cover everything with this. Let's just do a few practices of using private variables in the next few files. So I'll end this one here and then we'll do 6 and 6p in the next file or next video.